He said he won £47,000 at a casino. This would be typical of his methodology, the way he would speak to someone. Again, he offered her a drink that she accepted.
Worboys thought he'd perfected his cocktail of drugs, so they knocked out his victims. But on this occasion, things did not go to plan.
She, in fact, came to very, very briefly in the back of the cab. All she could talk about was you being on top of her. And his face was very close to hers.
In addition to the rape flashbacks, there was other substantial incriminating evidence.
She was a virgin before the incident. The next day, she was very sore in places she would not expect to be sore. And she made a complaint to the police, as a result of which her clothing was seized.
The trousers were taken for forensic analysis. Police now had the DNA of the attacker, but there were no matches on their database.
There was the DNA evidence from the scene of Mr. Worboys, which was on her clothing, and that was hugely supportive of the account that she had given.
Bizarrely, Worboys returned to the victim's address the very next day in an attempt to cover his tracks.
He left a note through the door with some money in it, money that he said that she had left as his fare in the cab the night before. I don't know why he did that. I think it's entirely likely that he was concerned that for some reason he would be captured, and to put a note through the door to say, well, clearly I wouldn't have done that if I'd done what you're alleging. That would be the kind of thing that he would say.
Although police had evidence of this one attack, they still had no idea they were dealing with a multiple sex attacker. But after years of missed opportunities, they were finally to link the crimes together in 2008. One policeman noticed something which rang alarm bells.
An officer at the Scotland Yard Central Sapphire Intelligence Unit linked Worboys' crimes. This was just one officer who was smart enough and bright enough to realise that there was a pattern there.
The officer had carefully looked through crime reports from across London over a number of years and noticed some startling similarities.
There were initially two that looked very, very similar, and as a result of checking further, they'd identified two others.
Solving the crime became a top priority. The job was given to a specialist team.
They called in an elite homicide and serious crime command team who usually deal with murders, who are vastly experienced, well-resourced, well-led, and got them to look at it.
This team was led by Detective Inspector Dave Reed.
My job was to collate everything there, to see what the similarities between the offences were, to see what differences there were, and to see what evidential opportunities there were. Were there things that hadn't been submitted for forensic analysis, for instance? Was there CCTV coverage that we could still look for? And the reality is that for 6 days, we did everything we could. We identified a further offence during that time. A week later, on the 14th of February, it was decided that the following morning there would be an appeal and we would go public. On Friday the 15th of February, one of the national newspapers ran the story.
When the police went public with their appeal, it triggered one very important telephone call.
A woman from a sexual referral centre contacted the police. She had treated the Greenwich student whose attack was caught on CCTV. Police had questioned John Worboys at the time, but never followed through. Finally, police had a name to go on.
Literally as soon as we could get from where our office is in southwest London to Rotherhithe, he was arrested.
The police wanted to search John Worboys' house before he was alerted to the public appeal. But would they get there before he had a chance to remove any incriminating evidence?
When I knocked on the door, there was a short delay, and then Mr. Worboys came to the window and he leaned out. I explained to him who we were and I asked him to come to the front door. He came downstairs, he was just dressed in his pyjamas, and I introduced myself and the other officers and we went into the address. When I cautioned him, he replied, "What's this all about?"
When police searched Worboys' flat in Rotherhithe, they found a treasure trove of forensic evidence and circumstantial evidence against him.
We recovered the bag, and the bag had a large sum of money in it, £3,680 in notes. In addition to that, you had a number of drugs, different types of drugs that were used, and various other things that he would have used during the commission of those offences.
As soon as I saw that bag containing those items, I recognised that this was clearly his toolkit that he was using when he went out to commit these offences. It was clearly items that were put together specifically for that purpose.
The officers not only found items which Worboys used to perpetrate his crimes, they also discovered crucial forensic evidence.
The DNA of one of the victims was found on a vibrator that was found in Worboys' possession.
Investigating a series of 5 serious sexual assaults. This gentleman has been arrested on suspicion of 5 evidence.
Worboys was so prolific that even on the morning of arrest it would come to light he had attacked and sexually assaulted what would prove to be his final victim.
Mr. Worboys was still committing offences right up until the time he was arrested.
It meant that in a wardrobe in his bedroom were found cups. The cup had the DNA of the last complainant on it and a combination of 2 sedative drugs in the dregs at the bottom of the cup.
Police knew John Worboys was the prime suspect in 5 attacks, but were unaware of the extent to which he had sexually assaulted women since he became a cabbie in the late 90s.
Police had to charge the first initial group of victims for the simple reason one couldn't bail a man like Worboys, and there certainly was enough evidence to charge him with them offences. But we were always telling the court and the defence solicitors that there would be almost certainly more charges to follow.
Police were in a race against time to build up the entire picture of Worboys' crimes and gather as much evidence as possible.
As soon as this story became public, there may well be a number of other women who would come forward and tell us of their experiences.
The case received widespread media attention. Police braced themselves for a response from more women.
The taxi driver police are hunting is a serial sex attacker who's struck at least 5 times.
It is a very frightening thing. Black cabs in London have a well-established reputation. They are very, very safe.
We had a 24-hour hotline set up, staffed by officers who were specifically trained in these type of offences so that they could record all of the details.
The investigation team was inundated with calls, and before long a staggering 83 women had been linked to the black cab rapist.
It's very unusual to get this number of victims in any case, let alone a case involving such horrible offences such as these.
Police held a huge number of identity parades to establish Worboys as the driver.
There were an awful lot of identification parades held because, quite amazingly, even though some of the offences were a couple of years earlier, many of the complainants said that they would be able to identify the taxi driver.
26 out of 60 women who went on identification procedures identified Mr. Worboys, which is a very high number.
The trial was due to begin in February 2009, but because Worboys had drugged his victims, would they be able to recall enough to convince a jury?
It was extraordinarily difficult here because of the fact that the victims, in the main, were unable to remember a great deal, and that in many of the cases they were only making a complaint months, in some cases years, after the incident took place.
Since 2002, black cabbie John Worboys had been using the cover of a trusted profession to attack and rape women right across London before he was arrested in early 2008. 83 women had now come forward with allegations, the biggest rape inquiry the Metropolitan Police had ever had to deal with. But how was it possible to get justice for all the victims?
We had to make a decision as to which charges we should take before the court. We couldn't charge 83 because we'd still be there now. We needed to choose those cases which gave a good indication to a jury of the type of offender profiling that John Worboys was committing.
The police emphasis on the strongest cases would involve 14 women and 23 separate charges, including rape, sexual assault and drugging.
Complexity is always the enemy of the prosecution. It assists the defence. We call it overloading the indictment. This is the most number of charges that I've ever put on an indictment. And I was somewhat worried that I'd put too many, but in the end I was satisfied that I had enough there. We brought all of the proper evidence before the court, and the court had enough powers upon conviction to sentence him according to his criminality.
Worboys pleaded not guilty, which meant all 14 women would have to relive their ordeal.
It went to trial at Croydon. It ran for 8 weeks. I think what was sad is that Mr. Worboys put those women through that trial. They were incredibly brave. All 14 women that gave evidence exceptionally well. But invariably, it's a very difficult thing to do. But by pleading not guilty, he put them through that.
Because John Worboys had not answered anything put to him during questioning, no one had any idea how he would behave in court.
His demeanour in court